The morning light spilled across my porch as I watered the roses, the same ones I'd planted the day I signed the deed to this house. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of morning that feels earned after years of sacrifice. Then I saw her car pull up. Margaret, my mother-in-law. The air shifted before she even stepped out. She moved with that deliberate calm people use when they're about to cause chaos but want to look polite doing it. I set down the watering can and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Morning, Margaret," I said softly. She didn't return the greeting. Her eyes swept over the house like an appraiser, cold and calculating. Then she smiled, that kind of tight-lipped smile that hides a dagger. "Grace," she said, "your house is perfect for my daughter." I blinked. "Excuse me," I said. She repeated slower this time, savoring every word. "Your house is perfect for my daughter." "They move tomorrow." The world tilted slightly, like I'd just stepped off a curb I didn't see. She sipped her coffee, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "The movers will be here by 9. You can start packing your personal things today." My first instinct was to laugh. It was so absurd it didn't even sound real. But Margaret's tone left no room for humor. She meant it. She really believed she could walk into my home, the one I'd worked 15 years to buy on my own, and claim it for her daughter like a royal decree. I kept my voice calm, steady. "Margaret, this is my home. I'm not sure what conversation you think we're having." She gave that dismissive wave she used with waitresses or people she didn't consider worth her time. "Oh, Grace, don't make this emotional. It's just practical. You don't have children. You don't need all this space. My daughter and her husband are starting a family. It only makes sense." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "Besides, you married into our family. What's ours is yours, and what's yours is ours." The sentence hit like a slap. For a second, I just stared at her, trying to decide if she was insane or just cruel. Probably both. My pulse thudded in my ears, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. "Is Ethan aware of this conversation?" I asked. Her smirk widened. "Of course. He agrees it's the right thing to do." The words landed heavier than any punch. "Ethan, my husband. The man who'd promised partnership, respect, equality." He'd known, he'd agreed. Margaret mistook my silence for surrender. "Good," she said crisply. "Then we understand each other." She turned to leave, her heels clicking sharply against the porch, but paused at the steps. "Oh, and Grace," she added, glancing over her shoulder, "don't make this harder than it has to be. You'll only embarrass yourself." Her car door slammed, and within seconds she was gone, leaving exhaust fumes and a tremor in my chest. I stood there for a long time, the morning suddenly colder, the quiet heavier. Inside the house seemed to breathe with me, its walls, the faint smell of cedar, the hum of the refrigerator. This place wasn't just property. It was every late night, every paid-off bill, every silent victory over fear. They thought they could take it because they'd mistaken kindness for weakness. I looked at the framed photo on the hallway shelf, me signing the deed, smiling through tears. "They move tomorrow," I whispered, repeating her words. Then, softly, but with steel beneath it, I said to myself, "Then I prepare tonight." 15 years ago, this house had been nothing but a foreclosure, listing a forgotten structure with peeling paint, a cracked porch, and weeds tall enough to hide the front steps. Most people saw a burden. I saw a promise. Back then, I was 30, divorced, working double shifts at a community bank, and still clawing my way out of the financial ruin my ex-husband left behind. I'd vowed never again to depend on anyone's name but my own. The first night I moved in, I slept on an air mattress with a single lamp and ate canned soup on the floor. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I remember whispering into the dark, "This is where my life begins again." That house became my sanctuary. Every nail I hammered, every coat of paint I rolled on those walls was a declaration of independence. When the bank sent me the final statement saying the mortgage was fully paid, I framed it next to my college diploma. It wasn't just paper. It was proof that survival could turn into triumph. Ethan entered my life years later. He was charming, attentive, and everything I thought I wanted in a partner. For a while he was kind too. But from the moment I met his mother, Margaret, I sensed the storm behind her polished manners. She was the kind of woman who mistook control for love. Her hugs always lingered too long, her compliments came edged with subtle criticism. "Such a nice little house you have, Grace," she'd said the first time she visited, "though it's really more of a starter home, isn't it?" I'd smiled, pretending it didn't sting. Over time, her visits grew more frequent, her comments more pointed. "You know, Ethan's sister Emily is still renting that tiny apartment. Poor thing. This house would be perfect for her." At first, I brushed it off. People say things they don't mean. But Margaret meant every word. She was testing boundaries mine. And Ethan, sweet conflict-averse Ethan, never stopped her. He'd just sigh and say, "That's how Mom is." Don't take it personally. But I did. Every single time. Because I knew what she was doing, slowly rewriting ownership in her head. To her, the house was never truly mine. It was borrowed property waiting to revert to real family. I'd seen her type before, women who wield tradition like a weapon. They praise sacrifice as long as it benefits them. The irony was that she didn't know the story behind these walls. She didn't know that this wasn't just a house. It was the final promise I'd made to my younger self, the promise that I'd never let anyone make me feel small again. When I'd first bought the place, I'd made a silent pact: if I ever had the means, this home would one day help other women who needed the same fresh start I did. It was why I kept a small file marked Grace Foundation in my office drawer. Just an idea, then plans for a trust that would protect the property and use it as a haven for women leaving abusive or controlling marriages. I hadn't told anyone, not even Ethan. Some dreams are too fragile to share until they're real. I'd been preparing for years, quietly collecting legal advice, consulting with a friend who was an attorney, putting documents in motion to make this house untouchable in case of death or divorce. Margaret had no idea how far ahead I'd thought. To her, I was just the quiet, polite daughter-in-law who smiled too much and spoke too little. That was her mistake. She thought silence meant surrender, but silence is sometimes strategy. As I walked through each room that evening, the kitchen I'd remodeled, the living room filled with morning light, the small study that smelled faintly of lavender and ink, I felt the pulse of everything I'd built. Margaret wanted this space because she thought it was about comfort, about walls and floors and furniture. But this home wasn't a possession. It was a monument to survival. I ran my fingers over the window frame and whispered the same words I'd said years ago when I signed the papers. "This is where my life begins again." Only this time it wasn't a beginning. It was preparation. Because Margaret's move wasn't the end of my ownership. It was the start of her lesson. The next Sunday, we had dinner at Margaret's house, a place that always smelled like money and judgment. Her dining table could seat 12, but she'd set it for 6 herself, Ethan, me, his sister Emily, and Emily's fiancé, Patrick. The seating arrangement, as always, put me at the far end, directly across from Margaret. That wasn't an accident. She liked to watch me. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, made me feel like a guest at my own husband's family table. "Grace," she said, slicing into her roast chicken with surgical precision, "I was telling Emily how generous you've been, opening your home, making it available for family. It's truly the Christian thing to do." The fork froze halfway to my mouth. "Excuse me." "Oh, don't be modest," she continued, waving her knife like a conductor. "You said you understood that family shares resources. We all agreed your house makes sense for Emily and Patrick as they start their family." Ethan cleared his throat. "Mom, we didn't!" "Ethan," she snapped, "you yourself said Grace's house is too big for 2 people. Did you not?" His silence was its own confession. Emily smiled politely, the kind of smile that avoids conflict but quietly enjoys the attention. "I'm sure we can find another place, Mom," she said weakly. "Don't be silly," Margaret interrupted. "Family helps family." Then she turned to me, her voice dripping with sweet poison. "You married into our family, Grace. That means you share what you have. What's yours is ours, and what's ours is yours." The sentence landed heavy, familiar, the same tone she'd used on my porch. My fingers tightened around the napkin in my lap. I forced a steady breath. "I wasn't aware marriage meant surrendering property," I said evenly. Margaret's eyebrows lifted. "Oh, Grace, you can't cling to everything. That's not love. You must learn to trust family." Her words were soft, but the sting was deliberate. Across the table, Ethan's fork scraped against his plate, the sound slicing through the tension. Mom, please, he muttered, but it was too late. The damage was done. Everyone was watching me now. I could feel it, the subtle collective judgment, as though my refusal to comply made me the selfish one. Margaret leaned back, triumphant, satisfied. You'll understand one day, she said, sipping her wine. This isn't about ownership. It's about belonging. Her version of belonging, I thought, meant erasure. It meant handing over pieces of yourself until nothing remained but obedience. My pulse slowed. I smiled faintly. You're right, I said softly. I am learning. Her smile faltered for half a second, confused by my calm. Learning what dear who truly belongs at my table. The words were quiet but heavy, landing with the precision of a blade. Emily looked up sharply, sensing the undertone. Ethan dropped his gaze to his plate. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Then Margaret laughed, brittle and forced. Such spirit. I suppose that's part of your charm. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The rest of the meal passed in uneasy silence, the kind that hums with things unsaid. When we left, Ethan didn't speak until we reached the car. You could have been more diplomatic, he said, eyes fixed on the road. Diplomatic, I repeated. Your mother tried to claim my house, Ethan. He sighed. She doesn't mean harm. She just wants what's best for the family. Her family, I said, not ours. He didn't answer. His silence told me everything I needed to know. That night, lying awake beside him, I realized something with painful clarity. Margaret didn't see me as part of her family, and neither did Ethan. To them, I was convenient, temporary, an asset to be managed. I turned to the window, watching the moonlight stretch across the room I'd built from nothing. They thought they were stripping me of belonging. They didn't know I'd already built my own. They thought they were taking my house. What they didn't see was that this house had already become my shield. It started with a text message. No greeting, no explanation, just a single line that made my blood run cold. Movers arrive at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Please have your things ready. I stared at it for a full minute, waiting for the punchline that never came. The message came from Margaret's number. My first instinct was to call Ethan. He didn't pick up. I called again. Still nothing. 10 minutes later, a new message appeared. Ethan agrees this is for the best. We'll handle everything. For a moment, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from disbelief at the audacity. I walked into the kitchen and set my phone down on the counter. My reflection in the window looked different, calmer, colder. The part of me that used to cry was gone. I'd spent years rebuilding my life from ruins. I could handle one more attempt to take it from me. I checked the home security cameras. At 4:12 p.m., a white van had parked across the street. Margaret and two men stood at the curb, pointing toward my driveway, taking notes. One of the men gestured at the front door like he was planning an entry route. The footage showed Margaret standing proudly, hands on her hips, directing like a general surveying conquered land. My jaw tightened. They were actually planning to move me out of my own home. I texted Ethan again. We need to talk. His reply came 5 minutes later. Mom's just trying to help. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene. The phrase pulsed in my head, growing sharper with each repetition. How many times had women been told that I wondered, don't make a scene, don't raise your voice, don't fight back. It was the most efficient way to silence us. I looked around the kitchen. The cabinets I'd installed myself, the tiles I'd laid one weekend when I couldn't afford contractors. Every corner of this home had a story, a fingerprint of effort. Margaret saw square footage. I saw survival. That's when I knew this wasn't about defending a house. It was about defending my autonomy. And if they were coming at 9, then I had 16 hours to prepare. I made tea, sat at my desk, and pulled out the folder I'd labeled Grace Foundation. Legal. The paperwork was already in motion, months of preparation that Margaret knew nothing about. I'd been finalizing the transfer of the property title into a non-revocable charitable trust. The trust bore my name, but the beneficiary was a registered nonprofit for women's housing security. Once the transfer was completed, no one, not Ethan, not Margaret, not anyone, could sell or claim the property without legal violation. I called my attorney Jordan, an old friend from my banking days. Is it done? I asked. Everything's filed, he said. The new deed is active as of 8 a.m. this morning. Grace, are you okay? I will be, I replied. Can you send me the official copy tonight? Already on its way. You want me to alert law enforcement if they try anything? No, I said slowly. I want them to learn on their own. After we hung up, I printed the updated deed and the notarized foundation documents. I placed them in an envelope, sealed it, and slipped it into my leather folder. Then I wrote a short letter addressed to Margaret. You said my house was perfect for your daughter. I agree, it's perfect for every daughter who's ever needed a safe place to stand on her own. I left it unsigned. At midnight, I walked through the house again, one last inspection before the storm. The air felt electric, like the stillness before a summer thunderclap. Every picture frame, every lamp, every echo of laughter seemed to stand guard with me. Outside, the moonlight traced the outline of the porch steps where Margaret had stood that morning delivering her decree. I could almost hear her voice again. They move tomorrow. I smiled faintly. So do you, I whispered. Then I turned off the lights, slid the envelope into my bag, and went to bed, not in fear, but in anticipation. When the sun rose, I wouldn't be the woman they thought they could control. I would be the one who taught them what ownership truly means. The night before the movers were due, I sat at my desk, the lamp casting a soft amber glow across a stack of papers that could end an empire or at least one woman's illusion of control. My printer hummed quietly, spitting out the final page of the updated deed transfer. The sound was steady, deliberate, like a heartbeat. Outside, rain had started to fall, tapping lightly against the windows. It reminded me of the first night I spent here 15 years ago when the roof leaked and the wind howled, but I'd felt safer than I had in years. That same calm washed over me now. Fear had no place left to live in me. I checked the clock, 11:47 p.m. The house was still. Ethan hadn't come home. No apology, no call, no attempt to explain. Just absence. That told me more than words ever could. I slipped the freshly printed deed into a crisp envelope and sealed it. Then I wrote another letter, this one short and sharp, meant for Margaret's hands only. Margaret, you were right. This house is perfect for your daughter, but not in the way you think. I placed it in a separate envelope with her name in ink so black it looked like intent. Both letters sat side by side on the desk, waiting. The next morning I woke early and dressed with purpose. No makeup, no armor, just clean lines, quiet strength. I chose a white blouse and black slacks, professional calm. Not the picture of defiance, but of finality. I brewed coffee and stood at the window as dawn stretched across the sky. For a moment, I wondered if Ethan even knew what was about to happen. Whether he'd chosen ignorance or cowardice, I couldn't tell. The driveway was empty, but not for long. At exactly 8:42 a.m., a moving truck turned the corner. The sight should have shaken me, but instead it centered me. I took one last sip of coffee and set the cup down gently. I didn't need to fight. The truth would do it for me. I slipped both envelopes into my bag, walked to the front door, and opened it before they even had the chance to knock. The men looked startled, as if they'd expected resistance. "Morning," I said evenly. "You must be here for Mrs. Brooks." They hesitated. One of them checked his clipboard. Yeah. We were told to pack up the master suite and, load everything in the truck." "Perfect," I said with a small smile. "She'll be here soon." The words rolled out smooth as silk, every syllable dipped in control. They nodded uncertainly and went back to their truck. I closed the door and let out a slow breath. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence was electric, alive with certainty. On the table near the entryway, I placed the letter addressed to Margaret. The other envelope, the deed transfer and foundation documentation, stayed with me. It wasn't a weapon. It was a shield made of ink, law, and foresight. They thought they were coming to take something from me. What they didn't know was that I'd already given it away to something bigger, something lasting. I glanced at the clock again. 8:59, 1 minute before everything changed. "You move tomorrow," she'd said. I smiled to myself as thunder rolled faintly in the distance. "No, Margaret," I whispered. "You move out of my life today." The morning air carried that strange stillness before a storm, bright, heavy, expectant. I'd opened every curtain, letting sunlight flood the house, every inch of it gleaming like a stage prepared for its final act. At 8:59 a.m., the low rumble of a moving truck echoed down the street. A shiny white vehicle with bright movers stenciled in blue pulled up in front of my driveway, its engine idling like a restless animal. I stood by the window, coffee mug in hand, watching the show unfold. And there she was. Margaret Brooks, dressed in pearls and entitlement, stepped out of her car like a queen arriving at her coronation. Her daughter Emily trailed behind, her phone in hand, recording everything, probably expecting a dramatic breakdown for their private entertainment. Two men in matching uniforms began unloading empty boxes. "Morning, Mrs. Brooks," one called cheerfully. Margaret smiled with the satisfaction of someone watching her plans fall neatly into place. Then she turned her eyes toward the window and saw me. I met her gaze and smiled. Her smirk faltered just slightly before she adjusted it back into that condescending calm. She whispered something to Emily, and they started up the walkway together. I opened the front door before they could knock. "Good morning," I said evenly. "Right on schedule." Grace Margaret replied, her tone dripping with mock warmth. "I hope you've packed. The movers are ready to get started." Emily glanced around the entryway with curiosity, as if already imagining her furniture here. "It's even prettier in daylight," she murmured. Margaret nodded approvingly. "We'll take the master bedroom, of course," she said. "And this room will be perfect for the baby once Emily and Patrick move in." I raised an eyebrow. "The baby?" "Oh, yes," Margaret said brightly. "They've been trying for months. This house will be such a blessing for them." She gestured to the movers. "You can start with these boxes. That's fine." One of the movers hesitated. "Ma'am, are you sure this is the right address? I just want to confirm." "Of course it is," Margaret interrupted, impatient. "This is my family's home." The word family hit the air like an accusation, like a challenge. I set down my coffee mug, calm as still water. "Before you start moving things," I said quietly, "you might want to read something first." I reached for the envelope sitting on the console table. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "What is that, a letter?" I said, handing it to her. "For you." "I don't need letters, Grace. I need you to clear out your things." She moved to push past me, but I stepped aside deliberately, forcing her to face me fully. "You'll want to read this one," I said softly. Her irritation flared. "Fine." She tore the envelope open dramatically, like she was proving a point. The paper unfolded, and I watched the exact moment her expression shifted from arrogance to confusion, then to something close to panic. Her lips parted. Her eyes darted across the page once, then again. "What is this?" she demanded. "Legal documentation," I said. "You like being practical, don't you?" "Margaret," Emily frowned, moving closer to peek at the letter. "Mom," Margaret's voice trembled slightly, though she tried to mask it. This says the property has been transferred to a foundation." "That's right," I said. "The Grace Turner Foundation. It's a registered nonprofit dedicated to helping women rebuild their lives after leaving controlling relationships." Her face paled. You can't do that." "I can," I said. And I did. "As of 8 a.m. yesterday, this house legally belongs to the foundation. I'm its director, not its owner. So technically, Margaret, it isn't mine anymore. And it certainly isn't yours." Emily's camera hand lowered. "Mom," she whispered, "you said this was already agreed." Margaret's composure cracked. "This is fraud," she shouted. "You think you can trick your family like this? After everything we've done for you?" "You mean after everything you've tried to take from me?" I asked, my tone still level-controlled. "This house isn't just walls and furniture. It's where I rebuilt my life. And now it'll be where others do the same. You wanted a home for your daughter. I've made sure she and every woman like her will always have one." The movers froze mid-step. One of them whispered to the other, "Damn!" Outside, a few neighbors had stopped to watch. I could see Mrs. Jensen from across the street, her hands clasped over her mouth in disbelief. Margaret's color drained entirely as she crumpled the letter in her hand. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You think the world will applaud you for humiliating me? I don't need applause," I said. "Just peace." Emily tugged at her mother's arm. "Mom, please let's go." But Margaret wasn't done. "You'll regret crossing me, Grace," she said again, her voice shaking. "You'll see." I stepped closer, lowering my voice until it was almost gentle. "The only thing I regret I said is believing you were capable of love." For the first time, she had no answer. She turned sharply, storming toward the driveway. The movers exchanged uneasy glances and followed her boxes still empty. As her car pulled away, I stood at the top of the steps, the morning sunlight spilling over me like a benediction. It was over, or so she thought. Because humiliation wasn't the end of Margaret's lesson, it was just the beginning of her education in humility. When their car disappeared around the corner, I finally exhaled. The envelope still in her hand had been just one piece of what I'd prepared. The rest waited on my desk, the full documentation of the trust, the notarized deed transfer, and the legal memorandum outlining its purpose. It wasn't vengeance, it was insurance. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same place where Margaret had once told me I was lucky to have married into their family. Now it was my war room. Every page on that table was a shield made of ink and law. That afternoon, I received a call from my attorney, Jordan. "You'll never guess who tried to call the county clerk's office," he said dryly. "Margaret Brooks, I guessed. Twice he confirmed. She demanded to know how to reverse a deed transfer. The clerk referred her to legal counsel. I assume that's when she realized she doesn't have standing." I smiled, though there was no pleasure in it. "Thank you, Jordan. I just wanted her to see what power looks like when it's earned." He hesitated. "You've set this up beautifully, Grace. But I need to ask, are you ready for the fallout? Because this will ripple. Let it," I said simply. He chuckled softly. "That's what I thought." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet and replayed the morning in my head. Margaret's expression so sure, so composed when she said they move tomorrow. That same mouth had gone white when she saw the truth in her hands. I didn't need revenge. Watching entitlement collide with reality was satisfaction enough. Around 4 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Emily standing on my porch, her face-pale phone clutched in one hand. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. She looked smaller without her mother beside her, less cruel, more confused. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. She sat on the edge of the sofa, twisting the hem of her cardigan. "Mom's furious," she said. "She's calling everyone, saying you humiliated her on purpose. She wants me to post a video telling people you forged something." "And will you?" I asked. Emily shook her head. "No, I saw the paperwork. It's legal. And, honestly, it was impressive." She looked at me with something between admiration and guilt. "You didn't raise your voice. You didn't even flinch. You just handled her." "She handled herself," I said softly. Emily hesitated, then added, "Mom doesn't understand people like you. She thinks control is love." That caught me off guard. For the first time, I saw her not as an accomplice, but as another casualty. "You don't have to be her reflection, Emily," I said gently. "You can choose peace." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I hope I can." She stood to leave, then paused. "Mom said you'll regret giving the house away. Do you?" I looked around the living room, the sun setting through the curtains, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the framed photo of me holding my first house keys. "No," I said. I didn't give it away. I passed it forward. That night, my inbox began to fill. Messages from women I'd mentored through financial literacy programs, congratulating me after hearing rumors of what happened. Somehow the story had spread. A neighbor must have posted the video. The headline read, "Mother-in-law tries to seize daughter-in-law's house, gets legal lesson instead." Thousands of views, hundreds of comments. Finally, a story where the quiet woman wins. Grace Turner for president. This is what calm power looks like. I scrolled, smiling faintly. The internet had turned my private battle into a public statement, but the truth was quieter, simpler. It wasn't about viral justice. It was about reclaiming my peace. Margaret had spent years believing she could measure my worth by what she could take from me. Now she'd learned that real wealth isn't held in deeds or furniture. It's in preparation, in clarity, in self-respect. I turned off my phone and poured a glass of wine. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and clean. I stepped out onto the porch and listened to the crickets. Tomorrow, the paperwork would go public, the foundation website, the press release Jordan was drafting the partnership with local women's shelters. Soon, the entire community would know exactly what this house had become a sanctuary. Margaret wanted a trophy. I built a legacy. I raised my glass to the night sky, feeling a rare kind of stillness. "You were right, Margaret," I murmured. "This house is perfect for every woman who learns that silence doesn't mean surrender." By Monday morning, the story had outgrown the street, the neighborhood, even the city. It started small, a few posts from neighbors on Facebook, each sharing their version of what they'd seen. "Woman defends her home from entitled mother-in-law," one caption read. But within 48 hours, the clip had reached national groups focused on women's empowerment. Headlines bloomed across my feed like wildfire. "She tried to take her daughter-in-law's house and got schooled by the law." Someone had spliced together footage of the confrontation, the movers in the driveway. Margaret's voice raised my calm replies. The video hit 1 million views before the end of the week. Ethan called that night, his voice heavy and tight. "You've humiliated my mother," he snapped. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one he'd eaten at countless times, while his mother critiqued my cooking. "Your mother humiliated herself," I said quietly. "I just opened the door." He went silent for a moment, then muttered, "Do you have any idea what people are saying? I lost a contract at work today. My boss saw the video." "Maybe your boss doesn't like bullies either," I said. He started to argue, but I hung up before he could continue. There was nothing left to say. By Wednesday, the local news had picked up the story. A reporter left a note at my door asking for an interview. I declined. I didn't need to tell my version. The truth was already louder than any headline. When I went to the grocery store, strangers stopped me in the aisles. "Are you the woman from the video?" one elderly lady asked, gripping my hand. "Good for you, sweetheart." "Some of us waited too long to stand up to people like her." Another woman whispered, "You gave every one of us a little courage." But not everyone was cheering. Margaret apparently was on a rampage. She'd started posting long, furious Facebook updates claiming I'd manipulated her son, forged documents, destroyed a family. Each post was met with hundreds of comments calling her out, reminding her that property deeds are public record. People began tagging the county website link under her posts showing the date-stamped ownership change to the Grace Turner Foundation. The truth was undeniable. Then came the fallout Margaret hadn't anticipated. Ethan's company had been handling a partnership with a local nonprofit that supported women in crisis. After the video spread, the nonprofit withdrew from the deal, citing moral and ethical conflicts. The company's PR department released a statement about upholding values of respect and equality. Ethan wasn't fired outright, but he was reassigned indefinitely. His pride took the hit harder than his paycheck. Margaret's bridge club removed her from the social committee. Her church friends stopped inviting her to luncheons. People whispered when she entered the grocery store. For someone who thrived on social control, isolation was the cruelest punishment of all. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Karma was efficient. Meanwhile, the Grace Turner Foundation gained traction overnight. Donations began pouring in. Women who'd watched the video sent messages offering help. Volunteers, lawyers, counselors. Within 2 weeks, we had enough funding to renovate the unused guest house into transitional housing. I worked 14-hour days managing the influx, but it never felt like labor. It felt like justice unfolding in real time. One afternoon, as I sorted through donation receipts, I received an email from a woman named Helen Marks. She wrote, "I left my husband last month after 30 years. Watching your video reminded me that I'm not weak for wanting peace. Thank you for showing that grace can have power." I reread that line several times, feeling something loosen in my chest. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to cry, not from anger, not from fear, but from relief. That evening, I lit a candle on the dining table and sat quietly as the house settled around me. I thought about how Margaret had once said this home was too big for one person. Maybe she'd been right, but for all the wrong reasons. The house wasn't meant to hold just one life. It was meant to hold many. The irony made me smile. Margaret had tried to take my house to prove her power. Instead, she'd given me a platform to share it. Her greed built the very legacy she wanted to destroy. Outside, the porch light flickered to life, automatically illuminating the roses I'd planted years ago. They'd bloomed again, stronger, deeper in color, impossible to ignore. Just like me. 3 months passed before I realized how completely the house had changed, not in structure, but in spirit. The laughter of strangers had begun to fill it again, only they weren't strangers anymore. The Grace Turner Foundation had officially opened its doors to its first 3 residence women rebuilding their lives after leaving homes that had once felt like cages. The first was Lena, a quiet nurse who'd escaped a husband who tracked her every move. The second, April, a young mother who'd been told she'd never survive on her own. The third, Carla, a teacher who'd lost her job after standing up to a superior. Each woman carried her own kind of silence, the kind that hides bruises you can't see. But day by day, that silence began to break. I'd hear it in the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, in the late-night conversations spilling from the porch. The house that Margaret had called too big for one person was now the perfect size for healing. My days fell into rhythm. Mornings started with coffee and paperwork, emails, donations, volunteer schedules. Afternoons were for coaching sessions, teaching financial literacy to women who'd never had their own bank accounts. In the evenings, I cooked dinner with them, simple meals that somehow tasted like freedom. One night, Lena stood at the sink washing dishes and said softly, "You know, Grace, I thought I'd never feel safe in a house again." She paused, then looked over her shoulder. "But this place feels steady, like it's breathing for us." I smiled, feeling that familiar warmth bloom in my chest. "It's supposed to," I said. "It was built from someone's fight to stay standing." When the women went to bed, I'd walk through the halls, running my hand along the walls, listening to the house settle. It hummed differently now, alive, full of motion and purpose. The foundation's nameplate gleamed on the front porch, the Grace Turner Foundation, a place to begin again. Sometimes I thought of Margaret and Ethan. They'd both gone quiet. Margaret had stopped posting online. Ethan had moved out of state, from what I'd heard, trying to start over in another city. There was a time I might have wished them misery, but now I only wished them distance, the kind that keeps peace intact. I'd learned something unexpected through all of this. Peace isn't a gift. It's a practice. You choose it over and over, especially when anger tempts you with its easy fire. The more I chose it, the lighter I became. One evening, I stood outside watering the roses the same way I had the morning this all began. The air smelled of rain and fresh soil. The sun hung low behind the oak trees, casting everything in gold. I caught my reflection in the window, older, calmer, unflinching. The house looked back at me strong and unbothered, no longer just a refuge, but a living testament. Margaret had wanted to erase my independence. Instead, she'd immortalized it. For the first time, I whispered into the quiet, "You were right, Margaret. This house really is perfect, just not for the reasons you thought." And when I turned to go back inside, I swore I could almost hear the house answer softly, like gratitude. It was early evening when I saw the familiar car pull into my driveway. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stood at the window watching the silver sedan idle by the curb. The driver's door opened slowly and Margaret stepped out. Time had done something to her. The woman who once moved like she owned the ground beneath her feet now seemed smaller, her posture bent slightly forward, her steps cautious. She wasn't wearing pearls this time, just a beige cardigan, her hair pulled back loosely. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen in her before: uncertainty. I opened the front door before she reached it. We stood there facing each other in the amber light. For a second, the silence was thick with all the things she'd once said to me, all the things I'd never said back. Then she spoke. "Grace," she began, her voice low, trembling at the edges. "I didn't expect you to answer." "You came all this way," I said softly. "The least I can do is open the door." Her eyes darted past me into the house. The sound of laughter drifted faintly from the back room, Lena and Carla cooking dinner together. Margaret blinked, her face tightening as if she couldn't quite process what she was seeing. "It's different," she whispered. "It is," I said. "You said this house was too big for one person. Turns out you were right. It's just the right size for 4. Her lips parted slightly. "You turned it into a shelter." "A foundation," I corrected. "For women who needed a home just like I did once." Margaret looked down at her hands. "I saw the news reports," she said quietly. "People keep sending me the video, tagging me in it like it's some kind of lesson. I can't go anywhere without seeing my face on a screen." "Maybe it was a lesson," I said gently. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I thought blood made family." she said, her voice breaking. I thought power meant protecting what's ours. But I see now that all I protected was my pride. I hurt you, and I hurt my own son. You did, I said. There was no venom in my tone, just truth. She took a small step forward. I came to ask if you could forgive me. I don't expect it, not today, maybe not ever, but I needed to look you in the eye and say I'm sorry. You were right. This house was never about walls, it was about strength. I just didn't recognize it. The kitchen light behind me flickered, and I caught a glimpse of the photo wall, smiling faces of the women now living here, snapshots of laughter and resilience. I thought about the first time Margaret had stood in this same doorway declaring her ownership. Now she stood there stripped of it all, titles, control, certainty. I don't hate you, I said quietly. But forgiveness isn't something you get to demand. It's something you earn. You can start by living differently. She nodded slowly, her chin trembling. I want to try. For the first time, I believed her. I opened the door a little wider. Would you like to come in for tea? Margaret blinked, startled. You'd let me. I didn't build this house to keep people out, I said. I built it to remind people they can start again. That includes you if you want it to. Her eyes filled, then not with entitlement, but relief. I don't deserve your kindness. No one does, I said. That's what makes it powerful. She stepped inside slowly, hesitantly, like she was afraid the ground might reject her. But it didn't. The warmth from the kitchen met her halfway soft and unjudging. As I poured tea for her, I realized this wasn't a surrender. It was the completion of something bigger, the circle of grace that had started the moment she tried to take everything from me. Margaret wrapped her hands around the mug, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. I met her gaze across the table. Don't thank me, I said. Just do better. Outside, the roses swayed in the wind, their petals bright against the fading light, proof that even what's cut down can bloom again. Margaret didn't stay long that evening. She drank her tea, quietly asked after the women who lived there, and left with a promise to try. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something close to peace. After she left, I thought the past had finally stopped knocking. I was wrong. A week later, Ethan showed up. I was in the garden pruning roses when I heard his voice. Grace. I froze. The sound of my name from his mouth felt foreign now, like a word from another life. I turned slowly. He stood at the gate, looking thinner, paler, carrying the kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. Can we talk? He asked. I hesitated. You can talk. Whether I listen depends on what you have to say. He sighed and pushed a hand through his hair. I didn't know Mom was going that far, he began. I thought she was just trying to scare you, to pressure you into moving. I never agreed to it. I set down the shears. You didn't stop her either. He looked down. No, he admitted. I didn't. His voice cracked, and for the first time I saw regret, real, raw, and unfiltered. I was afraid to stand up to her. I've been afraid my whole life. You let fear speak for you, I said, and silence is just another kind of betrayal. He nodded slowly. I know. I lost everything because of it. My job, my friends, even the respect of my mother. She's different now, quieter. I think she finally sees what she's done. That's between you and her, I said, turning back to the roses. Grace, he said softly. I came to apologize. Not for her, for me. I loved you, but I didn't protect you. You built something beautiful, and I let my family treat it like a prize. His words hung in the air, fragile and heavy. I could have ignored them, but the truth deserved to be acknowledged. I turned to face him fully. You didn't lose me because of your mother, Ethan. You lost me because when she came for my dignity, you handed her the door. He swallowed hard. I don't expect you to forgive me. I know. He took a step closer, desperation flickering behind his tired eyes. Do you ever miss us? For a moment, I considered lying, offering him mercy he didn't earn. But I'd learned that truth is a better kind of grace. No, I said. I miss who I thought you were. He closed his eyes, nodding slowly, the weight of it sinking in. You've changed, he murmured. No, I said. I've returned to who I was before you convinced me to shrink. Silence stretched between us. Behind me, the house door opened. Lena stepped out holding a tray of teacups, her laughter still echoing from inside. She paused when she saw Ethan. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize. It's fine, I said gently. Ethan was just leaving. He looked from her to me. realization dawning. "You're not alone anymore." "No," I said, smiling faintly. "I never was. I just needed to remember that." He nodded, defeated but calmer. "I'm glad you're okay, Grace. Really." "I'm more than okay," I said. "I'm finally free." He lingered for a moment longer, then turned and walked back down the path. As the gate clicked shut behind him, I felt something lift an invisible weight I'd carried for too long. Closure didn't come with fireworks or dramatic speeches. It came quietly, like exhaling after holding your breath for years. Lena approached, setting the tray down on the table. "Friend of yours?" she asked carefully. "Someone I used to know," I said. She smiled. "He looked like he didn't know you anymore." I smiled back. "He doesn't. Not this version." We sat down pouring tea as the late afternoon light filtered through the garden. The roses swayed, the foundation hummed with quiet life, and I realized that Margaret's prophecy had come true in a way she never imagined. Her family had moved in, just not the one she chose. The house was full again of voices, laughter, resilience, and women who refused to be erased. And me, finally, I was home. The following spring, the house bloomed. The roses along the fence had doubled thick and fragrant, curling around the porch railing like threads of memory. The sunlight through the kitchen window hit the walls just right, warm, golden, forgiving. Every morning began the same way: the scent of coffee, the sound of laughter from the women in the kitchen, the rhythm of healing and motion. We'd grown. The Grace Turner Foundation had gone from one house to 3. The second property had been donated by a retired teacher who'd seen my story online. The third came from a couple who'd lost their daughter to domestic violence and wanted her name to live on in safety. Each home had its own heartbeat, its own rhythm of rebuilding. I spent my days coordinating with volunteers, lawyers, therapists, ordinary people doing extraordinary things simply because they believed in the power of second chances. Some nights when the house was quiet, I'd sit by the window and reread the letter that started it all, the one Margaret had torn open in my doorway. The creases were worn now, but the words still pulsed with quiet defiance. "This house is perfect for your daughter, but not in the way you think." I sometimes wondered if Margaret still had her copy, the one I'd left in her shaking hands that day. Maybe she kept it, maybe she burned it. Either way, it had done its work. She hadn't shown up again after our tea, but once a month, a donation appeared under the foundation's name, anonymous. Always the same amount, always on the first of the month. I didn't need a signature to know. That was her version of repentance, a quiet, ongoing act instead of another performance. I respected that. As for Ethan, he'd remarried out of state. I learned it through a mutual friend. There was no bitterness left, just the faint ache of something that had outlived its usefulness. Love. I realized isn't always meant to last forever. Sometimes it's just meant to teach you how to stop settling for less than you deserve. One afternoon, a young journalist came to interview me for a feature titled "The House That Chose Its Family." She was barely 30, bright-eyed, carrying a notebook filled with questions, but speaking with the softness of someone who'd lived through her own quiet battles. "Why didn't you fight her publicly?" she asked me at one point. "Most people would have gone to court, made her pay." I smiled. "Because peace is its own punishment for people who feed on chaos. You can't humiliate someone who doesn't need to win." She wrote that down carefully, her pen pausing midair. "So the house, what does it mean to you now?" I looked around, taking in the framed photos along the hallway, women smiling, holding new apartment keys, graduation caps, divorce decrees, first paychecks. "It means everything." "It was always meant to mean," I said. "Safety, rebirth, proof that what's built with love can't be stolen by greed." After she left, I stepped outside barefoot on the porch and watched as the newest residents, 2 young sisters barely in their 20s, hung flower boxes under the window. They waved at me and I waved back. The scene was so simple, so ordinary, yet it felt sacred. That night, as the stars blinked awake above the roofline, I sat at the dining table, the same one where Margaret once declared, "You married into our family. What's ours is yours." I traced the wood grain with my fingertips and thought of how wrong she'd been and how right I'd become. Family isn't ownership, it's choice. It's the people you open your door to, not the ones who demand to walk in. When I finally went to bed, I left the porch light on. Not for Margaret, not for Ethan, but for the women still searching through their own darkness. Because somewhere out there, another Grace was standing on a cold porch being told she didn't belong. And when she found her way to this door, the light would be waiting. The house no longer needed to be defended. It had become what I always dreamed it could be, a living promise, a home that chose its family. In the stillness, I whispered one last time, "You were right, Margaret. This house is perfect." Then I smiled softly and added, because it finally became what it was always meant to be, free. Outside, the roses swayed gently in the night breeze, their petals catching the starlight like quiet applause. The house seemed to hum in response, alive and eternal. And for the first time in my life, I didn't just own peace, I lived inside it.